This civilization may look like the height of glory, but behind the marble temples, the golden eagles, and the legions that marched across the world, a chilling secret was at work. The Romans didn't just conquer through war. They conquered through blood. They engineered humanity itself, turning birth, love, and lineage into weapons of the state. Every child, every marriage, every womb served one single purpose: to forge the perfect soldier. Beneath the glory of Rome's empire, beneath the sound of trumpets and victory parades, there was a system far colder than any battlefield. It began not in the barracks but in the bedroom. What looked like civilization's triumph was in truth the rise of biological control, a world where even love was commanded, and life itself was designed to serve the empire. If this ruthless breeding system hadn't existed, Rome's war machine would have shattered long before it reached greatness. The empire's might depended on the creation of perfect warriors, bodies crafted by the laws of the state, not the hearts of men. But in their obsession to forge perfection, the Romans sacrificed something far greater: their own humanity. They believed that by controlling life, they could control destiny. Yet every law they wrote, every match they arranged, every child they judged, brought them closer to a slow extinction. Because what happens when you strip love, choice, and compassion from the heart of a people? You may build an empire of marble, but its foundation will always be dust. The Romans prided themselves on order, discipline, and control. But their control reached far beyond the battlefield. It reached into the most private corners of human life. When the Senate realized that strength could be bred just like horses or cattle, love became a matter of state. The empire needed soldiers, not dreamers. And so, Rome borrowed an idea that had once belonged to Sparta: the belief that the perfect warrior could be engineered through selective breeding. The Senate issued decrees pairing men and women not by affection, but by ancestry. Marriage became military policy, written into law. Families were no longer built on choice, but on command. Every union was inspected like a contract. Men were measured for height, muscle, and the proven courage of their bloodline. Women were judged by health, fertility, and the strength of their lineage. A broad frame meant strong children. A noble name meant better stock. Beauty mattered only as a sign of good breeding, not for love. To the Roman state, the ideal marriage was not between two souls. It was between two pedigrees. They called it duty. Others might call it control. In this system, women's worth was written in numbers: how many sons they could bear, how many soldiers they could give the empire. The more fertile the woman, the higher her value. The more successful the warrior, the more worthy he was of a mate. And when passion interfered, the state interfered too. The government could dissolve marriages it deemed unfit, forcing citizens to remarry according to better genetic advantage. There were no love stories in these unions, only strategies. Every law, every pairing, every decree served one single purpose: to maintain the strength of Rome. The home became a factory, and the marriage bed became a battlefield. It was a world where love could no longer choose, where the heart had no voice, and where desire itself was just another order to follow. In Rome, affection was weakness, choice was chaos, and love was replaced with legislation. In Rome, birth was not a private moment. It was a public judgment. When a child came into the world, it didn't belong to the mother who carried it, but to the empire that demanded it. The midwives and magistrates stood as witnesses of the state, not of life. Every newborn was inspected: its limbs, its cries, its strength. If the child was strong, it was accepted as a gift to Rome. But if it was weak, deformed, or sickly, it faced a different fate. The magistrate would turn his head, and that single gesture sealed the infant's end. No tears, no protest, no mercy. The Romans called it necessary. They believed that the survival of the empire depended on the purity of its people. In truth, it was nothing more than cruelty disguised as order. What the Spartans had once done on the cliffs of Taygetus, the Romans did in their marble courtyards. The same logic, the same cold calculation. They called it efficiency. They told themselves that to spare the weak was to endanger the strong, that removing imperfection was not murder but maintenance. To Rome, mercy was waste. Weakness was treason. Mothers were the silent victims of this law. They carried life for 9 long months, only to watch strangers decide if their child was worthy to live. Some turned away as the officials made their decision. Others begged for a moment, a glance, a chance to hold their newborn one last time. But law overruled instinct. Emotion was weakness, and weakness was forbidden. The state reminded them that they were not mothers, they were instruments. Their wombs belonged to Rome, and their duty was to produce strength, not sorrow. For every mother who wept in silence, for every child denied its first breath, the empire grew more certain of its purpose. They called it purification, perfection, destiny. But beneath those proud words was something far darker, a fear that compassion itself could undo an empire built on control. Rome taught its people that love was dangerous and pity was poison. And so they erased both, believing that by rejecting weakness they could perfect the world. They were wrong. Rome admired Sparta like a student admires a master. The Romans looked at the Spartan way of life and saw something powerful, a world built on order, control, and perfection through pain. They took that blueprint and made it their own. What began as admiration soon became imitation. The Roman elite studied Spartan discipline and turned it into policy. To them, discipline wasn't just a virtue. It was a tool for domination. The strength of the Spartan soldier became the model for the Roman citizen, hard, obedient, and unquestioning. The idea of selective breeding soon spread beyond the Senate and into the noble houses. Wealthy families began to arrange marriages with the same cold logic the Spartans once used. Noble blood had to stay pure, and weak blood had to disappear. Sons were raised to fight, daughters to bear more soldiers. The empire didn't just want loyalty, it wanted perfection written into every generation. Inside the academies of Rome, the same philosophy took root. Boys of noble birth were raised under strict discipline, trained to obey without hesitation, to think of the state before themselves. Their lessons were not of art or compassion, but of control. They were molded into instruments, not individuals, but the darkest reflection of the Spartan blueprint lived in the Colosseum. Beneath the cheering crowds and the blinding light, another kind of breeding took place, one that Rome never spoke of openly. Gladiators were not just fighters. They were part of a living experiment. The strongest were forced to breed with the strongest, generation after generation, until pain itself became inheritance. These men were built like iron, shaped by cruelty, and sold as entertainment. Rome turned the human body into a spectacle, a product of its obsession with strength. It was a human factory, built on blood and applause. The Colosseum became both a temple and a laboratory, a place where the empire's hunger for perfection devoured its own humanity. Every scream from the arena echoed the same truth that once ruled Sparta: strength is survival, and weakness must be erased. What the Spartans did for survival, the Romans perfected for power. And in doing so, they transformed their empire into something colder, more mechanical, and far more terrifying. In Rome, womanhood was not a matter of choice. It was a matter of duty. The ideal woman was not celebrated for beauty, charm, or grace. She was praised for one thing only: her service to the empire through childbirth. The Romans called her the Mother of Rome, a living symbol of loyalty, discipline, and sacrifice. Her body was not her own. It belonged to the state. Her purpose was written in law, and her honor was measured in the number of sons she gave to the empire. A Roman matron who bore strong children was treated with respect, but one who refused to marry or could not conceive faced disgrace. The empire left no room for personal will. A woman who chose not to marry was seen as selfish, a traitor to Rome's future. Laws were written to punish such defiance. Single women were taxed heavily, their wealth taken by the state. Widows were forced to remarry within a set time, not out of love, but out of obligation. Even mourning had a deadline. A woman's life belonged to Rome, from her first breath to her last. Her worth was not her mind or her heart. It was her ability to give birth to soldiers. Public ceremonies celebrated the mothers of many children. Statues were raised, rewards granted, names immortalized in stone. But for the barren, there was only shame. They were mocked in public and denied honors. The Empire's message was clear. A woman's body was not sacred, it was functional. Her womb was her weapon, and her silence was her virtue. The Empire called it glory. But for the women who lived it, it was bondage disguised as honor. To ensure fertility, Rome invented rituals that blurred the line between religion and control. During the festivals of the gods, women were paraded and blessed, their bodies marked as the property of divine purpose. Even intimacy was guided by the hand of the state. Matches were arranged, pregnancies monitored, and barren unions dissolved. Love had nothing to do with it. This was biology turned into governance. This was faith reshaped into politics. Their bodies became battlefields, not against enemies, but against nature itself. The Empire believed that through these women, Rome would live forever. But in truth, they were only building a prison made of flesh and obedience. Their wombs were Rome's factories, producing the future one life at a time, until there was nothing left of the women who created it. You wake on a cold stone floor. The air is sharp and your breath hangs like mist. You are 6 years old, and already the state has taken you. You do not live with your mother or father anymore. They were told to let you go, to surrender you to Rome's care. From this moment, you belong to the Empire. The barracks are your home, the instructors your new family. You are not raised as a child, you are built as a weapon. Every morning begins with hunger. The rations are small, the lessons harsh. You learn quickly that comfort is the enemy, and that mercy is a lie. The first rule is obedience. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not question commands. Pain is not punishment, it is instruction. When you fall, you rise without a sound. When you bleed, you thank the gods for making you stronger. Every scar becomes proof of worth. You are taught that fear is weakness, and hesitation is death. The instructors strip you of softness until nothing remains but instinct. They teach you to endure, to strike, to survive. The more you suffer, the more the state smiles. Hunger is not an accident, it is a teacher. It sharpens your senses, makes you cunning. When your stomach burns, you are told to steal food, not because theft is allowed, but because failure is worse. If you are caught, you are beaten, not for stealing, but for being caught. The lesson is simple. Success excuses everything, failure excuses nothing. In Rome's eyes, only results matter. Morality is weakness. Compassion is danger. You learn to see kindness as a trap, pity as betrayal. The Empire wants hunters, not heroes. When night falls, you sleep beside others who share your hunger and your silence. You no longer dream. You have forgotten how. The instructors call you brother, but you know they would kill you if ordered. In this place, trust is as fragile as breath. You are not a person, you are a project. The Empire is shaping you, molding you, burning away everything human to leave only strength. By the time you can lift a sword, you have already lost the ability to cry. By the time you march, you have forgotten how to feel. This is how Rome built its future, one child at a time. It created soldiers who did not hesitate, who did not question, who did not love. Children who grew into men of iron, loyal not to family or faith, but to the Empire alone. In their eyes, survival justified cruelty. Mercy equaled betrayal. And when these men looked at the world, they saw only enemies, even when they were looking at themselves. When the Roman youth came of age, their final test was not written in ink or carved in stone. It was written in blood. The Empire did not simply want obedient soldiers. It wanted killers without hesitation. And so began the Secret Purges, nights when the Empire hunted its own. Groups of young men, chosen for strength and silence, were sent into the streets and the countryside under the cover of darkness. Their mission was clear: to seek out rebels, escaped slaves, and anyone who dared to speak against Rome. These hunts were not called murders. They were called acts of civic defense. The Senate approved them. The law protected them. And the Empire pretended it was justice. Each year, new decrees were issued, granting permission to kill in the name of order. No court, no trial, no witnesses. Once the decree was signed, the city belonged to the shadows. The young killers moved like ghosts through alleys and farms, knives hidden beneath their cloaks. They whispered prayers not to the gods, but to the empire itself. For one night, they were Rome's invisible hand, cutting away anything that threatened perfection. The screams that broke the silence were erased by mourning, written off as necessary sacrifices. To question the killings was to question Rome itself. These purges were more than bloodshed. They were lessons. Every young man was forced to prove that mercy no longer lived in his heart. It was a ritual of transformation, from human to instrument. Those who hesitated were marked as weak. Those who killed without blinking were celebrated as true citizens. The purpose was not to destroy the enemies outside the empire, but to erase the humanity within its defenders. It was psychological sterilization, cleansing the soul until nothing remained but loyalty. In these dark nights, Rome's greatest fear was not invasion, it was rebellion from within. So it created a machine of terror that turned citizens into executioners. It taught them that cruelty was strength and silence was virtue. When the sun rose, the streets looked the same, but the hearts of those who walked them were hollow. Each purge left a deeper scar on the people who carried it out. Yet the state called it purity, order, peace. The empire had found its most powerful weapon, not the sword, not the army, but the human mind trained to kill without guilt. For centuries, Rome believed it had mastered perfection. Its soldiers were disciplined, its bloodlines pure, and its people loyal. But beneath the marble and triumphs, the empire was rotting from within. The same laws that once promised strength had become chains, tightening with every generation. The obsession with purity that built Rome's armies slowly began to destroy them. Families grew smaller, bloodlines grew thinner, and the empire's future began to shrink. What had once been the heart of power became a fragile machine, too perfect to change, too proud to adapt. The selective breeding that had once created warriors now created weakness. The same noble families that claimed divine ancestry were trapped by their own rules. They married within their circles, keeping their blood pure, and in doing so poisoned it. Children were born sickly, infertile, or frail. The very thing Rome had feared, imperfection, had returned, not from outsiders, but from within. The empire that once rejected weakness had bred it into its own bones. Discipline, the core of Roman greatness, turned into rigidity. Soldiers followed orders without question, even when those orders led to disaster. Commanders could no longer think, only obey. Rome had built perfect soldiers, but forgot to build thinkers. Innovation was replaced with tradition, and tradition became decay. The same system that once gave Rome victory now blinded it to change. While the world evolved, Rome stood still, trapped by its own perfection. Then came the flood of wealth. Gold poured into the empire after every conquest, and with it came something far more dangerous: greed. The virtues of discipline and sacrifice were replaced by hunger for luxury. The same leaders who once preached austerity now bathed in silk and wine. Corruption became culture. The Roman ideal of strength was drowned beneath excess. The children of soldiers became merchants of pleasure. The spirit that had forged an empire of warriors now rotted in palaces of comfort. Rome's grand design had turned against itself. It had engineered perfection so carefully that it forgot how to live. Its people became statues, flawless on the outside, hollow within. What began as control ended in collapse. The empire that once ruled the world slowly devoured itself, consumed by its own creation. In perfecting the body, they destroyed the soul. What began as strength ended in silence. Rome, once the living heart of power, became a monument to its own mistakes. The empire that dreamed of eternal glory had designed its own extinction. It tried to control life so completely that it forgot what made life worth living. Every law, every decree, every pairing was meant to create perfection, and for a time it worked. The legions marched, the cities flourished, and the world bowed before Rome's might. But slowly, The design turned against its maker. The machine that forged gods forgot it was built by men. As generations passed, the spark that made Rome human faded. What began as discipline hardened into emptiness. The children born from policy grew into leaders without compassion, rulers without vision. The empire that had engineered strength had bred sterility instead. Its people no longer lived, they functioned. And when the barbarians finally came, they did not destroy Rome. They simply walked through the cracks left by its own perfection. History remembers the greatness, the marble, the legions, the law. But beneath it all was a simple truth. Power without humanity is suicide. The Romans thought they could outlive death by perfecting the body, by refining the bloodline, by controlling destiny itself. But in chasing immortality, they erased the very thing that made them alive. The empire's greatest achievement became its own tomb. If history teaches us anything, it's this. Every empire that tries to breed perfection ends up burying itself. Because perfection isn't life. It's death wearing a crown. And Rome, the eternal city, proved that even the mightiest can fall when they forget what it means to be human.